Welcome. I'm Claire Shaeffer. I write sewing books and collect vintage fashions, which I use for research. I selected some bits and pieces from my book, Couture Tailoring, and I'll discuss some interesting details on a few jackets today. For full disclosure, I am the author of Couture Tailoring. The jacket on the cover is from the Chanel Spring-Summer 2020 Haute Couture collection. Sadly, it is not in my collection. Couture tailoring encompasses many elements. First and foremost, the garments are designed and custom-made to fit the clients who order them, and the garments are made by hand. Some jackets, like the Yves Saint Laurent, are inspired by men's tailoring, while others, like the Chanel, are more feminine. In haute couture, the client's pattern begins with the dress form, which has been padded to duplicate the client's figure. When the client's figure changes, her dress form is adjusted to reflect the changes. Here you can see the dress forms at two different couture houses. Made by hand does not mean that there is no machine stitching. Instead, it describes the thousands of hand stitches used to shape the individual sections throughout the construction and on the finished garment. In couture tailoring, there are two basic front designs, one-piece fronts and paneled fronts. Jackets inspired by menswear generally have a one-piece front. This Yves Saint Laurent jacket has darts, but many jackets have no darts. Generally, a woman's jacket has a separate underarm panel, while a man's jacket will have the front and underarm panel cut together. This Chanel jacket has a panel front with a seam beginning on the shoulder. There are many variations. Some seams begin at the armscye and some at the neckline. The backs on many Chanel jackets have only a center back seam and do not have seams from the shoulder. It is obvious that this Yves Saint Laurent jacket was inspired by menswear. It has a one-piece front, a notch collar, a handmade thread buttonhole, shoulder pads, two-piece sleeves with a working vent and 3 buttons and buttonholes. There is a welt chest pocket and 2 stand-away patch pockets at the hips. This shorter YSL jacket has a softer look. It has a one-piece front, a single button closure, no pockets, a two-piece sleeve with working vents, and of course shoulder pads. This sew-in or floating interfacing is used in most Yves Saint Laurent jackets. The front and back have full bias cut interfacings and bias cut chest pieces, which have been machine quilted together. The interfacings extend to the hemline. I prefer to have them lap so the hemline has a nice roll at the edge. For a softer look, you can pad stitch the interfacings together by hand and/or use less or different interfacings. Most Yves Saint Laurent jackets have an interfacing to support the sleeve cap. On this jacket, the interfacing extends to the bottom of the cap. It can extend 1 inch below the armscye or end at the middle of the cap. The sleeve heads are lamb's wool. The sleeve cap interfacing on this jacket is cut on grain. I prefer to cut it on the bias. The cuff interfacing is cut on the bias. Here you can see how the interfacings are cut. If the front interfacing extends over the bust, the interfacing will need a dart. The interfacings can be cut on the straight grain or on the bias or half bias. This shoulder pad is from the green Saint Laurent jacket you saw earlier. If you don't have a dress form to shape the shoulder pads, you can use a pressing cushion or a ham. When the jacket or any other garment has a dart, the dart is balanced so there will be no ridge at the stitching line. On this sample, a strip of bias cut interfacing was basted to the dart. Then the dart was stitched and pressed with the interfacing to one side and the dart to the other. You can use a strip of self fabric instead of interfacing, and it can be on grain instead of bias. Each of these jackets was inspired by menswear. All have a one-piece front, a notch collar, shoulder pads, two-piece set-in sleeves, button and buttonhole closures, thread buttonholes, and pockets. 2 are single-breasted and 1 is double-breasted. This Yves Saint Laurent jacket is a large size, and at first glance, it looks like a panel front. I've enlarged the image so you can see that it has a one-piece front with a dart from the shoulder to the pocket. These Dior jackets are also large sizes. Both jackets have darts and panel fronts. You can immediately see that these jackets are more feminine and more diverse. All have panel fronts, but only the Cardan has set-in sleeves. The Chanel has a raglan sleeve, and the Ungaro has a kimono sleeve. The Chanel and Cardan jackets have collars, but they are different. One is a shawl collar and the other is a turn-down collar. Other differences are the jacket length and button closures. Here you can see more differences. The length, the silhouettes, and plackets. The Chanel and Scazi have one-piece fronts, and the Philippe Vinet has a panel front. All have stand collars, but they are different. Here is an enlarged view of the 3 collars we just looked at, plus one more. The collars on the Scazi and the Vinet are cut by the pattern. On the Scazi, the center back is on the straight grain, with the cross grain at the top of the collar. On the Philippe Vinet, there is a seam at center back, and the top of the collar is curved. The Scazi is designed to stand away from the neck, like a Nehru collar, and the Vinet is cut to hug the neck. These jackets are from 1971. The jacket on the left is a copy of the original Chanel on the right. The collar on the copy is cut by the pattern, so it will hug the neck. The straight grain is located at center back with the front ends on the bias. This is the traditional shape for stand collars on most patterns and ready-to-wear designs. The collar on the original Chanel was cut straight and shaped with steam to hug the neck. This is not difficult and an important step in learning to shape other sections of the jacket. The shape of the collar on the Chanel copy was drawn on the muslin. Seam allowances have not been added. The collar is outlined with thread tracing on a fabric strip. You can see the straight grain at center back and the bias on the ends of the collar. The collar on the Chanel jacket is a straight strip that has been shaped to fit the neck. Here are the directions. Mark the width of the collar with thread tracings on a fabric strip. Do not mark the ends. Place a row of short basting stitches on the seam line at the top of the strip. Pull up the basting a small amount. Then, using the muslin pattern as a guide, steam and press the collar to shrink the upper edge. Depending on the fabric, you might want to stretch the seam line at the bottom. Repeat the steaming and shrinking until the collar shape mirrors the pattern shape. Mark the ends, add seam allowances, and cut out the collar. If you are interested in Chanel, check out this earlier video where I compare the original Chanel jacket and a copy of that jacket. I'm frequently asked, when do you use thread buttonholes and when do you use bound or fabric buttonholes? Generally, more feminine designs have fabric buttonholes, like this Ungaro, and more tailored designs have thread buttonholes. That said, many designers have a preference. Thread buttonholes were a favorite of Yves Saint Laurent. This is a very dressy tailored jacket, and it has thread buttonholes, but it could have had fabric or bound buttonholes. Bound or fabric buttonholes were a favorite of Marc Bohan at Dior. On this Dior jacket, the fabric buttonholes were cut and sewn to match the plaid pattern, so you can barely see them except when you look very closely. This is one of my favorite jackets, and if you are looking for a tailoring project, it is a good place to begin. It does not have to have a buttonhole closure, and the buttonholes on the pocket could be omitted. Also, it doesn't have sleeve vents. It does have a notch collar, which you might want to narrow, shoulder pads, and two-piece satin sleeves. I'm Claire Shaeffer. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, join my channel to explore a variety of designs, sewing techniques, and of course, more tailoring details. Here are some of my earlier videos.